With that, we'll go to Mr. Bazan, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I welcome the Minister and officials from D&D and CAF here. Welcome. Minister, as you know, in your defense policy update, you guys did estimates on where you're going to end up by 2032 on the 2% NATO commitment. Then that changed when you and the Prime Minister were down in Washington at the NATO summit. And now the PBO said that the numbers that were in the DPU were in error and that it's going to take an extra $41 billion to get to the 2% commitment by 2032. Why were the numbers fudged in the DPU and didn't even line up with GDP projections that's used by the Department of Finance?
Yeah, unfortunately, Mr. Bazan, your question indicates that you're somewhat confused by the sequence of events, and if I may clarify that for you. On April the 8th, we released the Defence Policy Update. The Defence Policy Update articulated a plan to bring Canada's defence spending to 1.76% by 2030. It was followed up by the spring budget, that also took place in the spring, obviously, of 2024, which had added significant new additional spending, which was approximately $1.81 million over the next 5 years, and $73 billion, those were billions, by the way, $73 billion over the next 20. That did not articulate a plan to bring us to 2%, but only to 1.76 in the next 5 years. We then sharpened our pencils, and we also explained in the ONSAF that we were going to do additional work because there was much more that needed to be done.
Not explaining how your number and projections are different than what the PBO said and GDP projections by the Department of Finance by your colleague, Minister Freeland.
I was trying to clarify for you the sequence of events.
He's not answering
Excuse me for both of you. We're getting into it a little earlier. Roughly, your question was a minute. I should give the minute back to the Minister to respond, and then we'll go from there. So you have about 30 or, no, you actually have about 15 seconds left in the minute. So.
And just to clarify, first of all, I always value the work of the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Provides very valuable advice and assistance to Parliament, and we take his reports very seriously. But I would just, as a point of clarification, Canada has made a commitment to reach 2% of spending for our GDP, and it's a NATO commitment. It's a NATO standard. NATO uses a different calculation for each nation, all 32 members, GDP. They use the OECD calculation, and we have based our commitment on the NATO standard, not on the numbers that the Parliamentary Budget Officer uses. I'm not arguing with the Parliamentary Budget Officer. As a matter of fact, I appreciate his ambition.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, we're stretching it here.
Yeah, and I say that the Parliamentary Budget Officer's numbers are based upon actual projections. So let's drill down on this budget, because this budget and these estimates actually show defense spending getting cut. There's, you announced one of your first announcements when you were named defense minister to cut $2.7 billion from the budget. Now, we know that that's impacted training and readiness of our forces. We had your former colleague, General Leslie, here, and he was talking about how our NATO brigade is no longer training as a unit, getting certified in combined arms training at Wainwright. And he says they're going to have to learn on the job using other people's equipment and expertise in the country. And he says that is not safe. So, Minister, why are we making our troops less safe and less capable and less ready by not fully making use of our facilities here in Canada, like CFB Wainwright?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. General Leslie is a former colleague and a good friend of mine. I've been to his home a number of times for dinner, but I respectfully disagree. And I would just point out to General Leslie, who served exceptionally well and admirably in the Canadian Armed Forces for many years, but he's been out for a while. I think that might be a question. The decision was an operational decision to do the training that you've referenced actually in theater in Latvia, where we're working in a coalition environment with 11 other nations. And the decision was made that in order to really maximize the benefit of that training, we should do it in that environment. And that's where it's taking place. It was an operational decision, and I might suggest that in the second hour you could reference that.
Okay, I will. So let's move on then.
To the Vice Chief.
One of the aspirations of Canada, of course, is to join AUKUS. We're receiving also the F-35s and the P-8s. That requires that we have a top secret cloud to be able to be interoperable with our allies. where are we at on getting that contract to ensure that we have a top secret cloud that's interoperable with Canada, the U.S., UK, and other allies?
Yeah, I don't want to get too far ahead of our discussions with AUKUS, but Canada's making some exceptional progress, and we are at the table discussing Canada's robust participation in the second pillar of AUKUS. There's ongoing work, and again, I would turn that question and perhaps suggest.
Back in the second hour. If you don't know, we'll just keep on moving on.
It's not that I don't know. It's just that there are elements of those contractual discussions that I don't think it would be appropriate for me to discuss, and perhaps the chief would have a much better understanding.
We'll deal that in the second hour. Okay, so we also know that because of the budget cuts that there was, you always said that this was in consulting, but my understanding is that there's also been cuts to satellite telecommunications services as well as ISR that we have been relying on in the past, that has also been taken away in the excess of $200 million. Is that a direct result of the $2.7 billion cuts that you're making to national defense?
Thanks for the opportunity to clarify that. We are reducing our spending, as every department in the government should, on executive travel, professional services, but we made it very clear, and I should have directed to the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defense that what we are not going to do is impact our operational readiness or the services and support that we supply to members of the Canadian Armed Forces. Because people are the foundation of the Canadian Armed Forces, and we're making a number of really significant investments in our people, including in housing and childcare, healthcare. We're increasing hiring. We're accelerating our response to personal crisis. And we're doing all of the things that our people have told us are necessary to make it easier for them to serve. We're going to continue to attract and retain and train the next generation of our forces. And I have some good news to share with this.
I'm not a real fan of run-on sentences. So if we could move on to Ms. Gallant, 5 minutes.
Thank you to the Minister. Amid the $2.7 billion in cuts, how are you ever going to replenish the ammo stockpile you depleted for our troops? What types and amounts of ammunition have been contracted for CAF use?
Thank you very much for the question. There are a number of questions. First of all, I think your characterization of a $2.2 billion cut is inaccurate. Last year, the actual reduction was substantially less than that, and I think, I'm sorry? $810 million, but it was not any reduction in munitions acquisition. As I've said, we've put money in the ONSAF, and it's $1.8 billion, and we're currently in contract negotiations. Battle decisive munitions, and I think everybody talks about the 155, but it's a broad range of munitions.
Minister, how do you decrease them when you decrease expenditures when nothing has been done in the first place? That stockpiles were depleted and not replenished. Well, we want to see where the contracts are. The soldiers want to know that they're going to have ammunition when sent into the theater.
Yes, ma'am. And as I said, right now, our budget for acquiring munitions is about $300 million a year. There was no reduction in that expenditure, and in fact, it went up last year. But we've also heard very clearly about the need to have an adequate supply of battle decisive munitions. One of the pressures, obviously, is the supports that we've also been providing to Ukraine, but that doesn't relieve us of any of us of our responsibility to make sure that CAF has what it requires, and we're investing in that.
Contracts. Okay, so our troops in Latvia have broken down vehicles, no mechanics. The troop carriers just non-functioning. Not only do they not have mechanics, but they don't have spare parts. So given this, how are we going to ensure in the short term with our leading that whole brigade that we're going to get them what they need should this become a hot war?
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, respectfully, you have mischaracterized the state of readiness. We've actually made some very significant investments in our deployment in Latvia, and we've just completed a major NATO training operation with our allies in Latvia. I would characterize it, as our NATO allies have done, as an overwhelming success and a demonstration of capability in that theater.
We're borrowing from other countries. We don't have our own for our own troops. We're relying on the mercy of others the way we relied on mercy for choppers in Afghanistan. Now, what impact will the $2.7 billion in cuts to CAF have on deterring the Russians or Chinese in the Arctic?
Respectfully, your characterization is not accurate. We are refocusing certain spending to make sure that we are spending money well on such things as hospitality and executive travel and professional services, but we are not in any way diminishing, and in fact, we're significantly increasing our investment in operational readiness. That means significant new investments in people, which are absolutely essential to the operations of the Canadian Armed Forces, in new platforms and equipment, new ships, new planes, new vehicles. All those investments and contracts have been signed and are well in train, and we're coming forward with these estimates, asking for the money that is required to maintain those fleets that you cite, and I agree, need to be kept in a state of good repair.
Thank you. Given that your government refuses to put the capabilities in place to deter foreign incursions in our Arctic by hostile nations, is the minister hoping the U.S. Will just take over that responsibility for our Arctic, because we're not doing anything in the short term?
In the long term as well. Respectfully, Canada is stepping up. And I invite you to go back and reread our new defense policy update, which talks about the necessary investments, Canada taking on greater responsibility for continental and national defense. We're already investing, as I've indicated to this committee, $38.6 billion in NORAD modernization. Canada is doing its part, and we're going to do more. We're investing in underwater surveillance. We're investing in new fighter jets. We're investing in new infrastructure.
We can print whatever we want. There's no execution plan. So given the CAF, the cuts to the CAF, what is the year-by-year training plan for the training of some submariners to be proficient on the new submarines, given that there's probably going to be a gap in capability in submarines? And once we've lost that capability, it's going to take a long time to get them up to snuff in and capable of deploying with our new submarines. So how are you going to do that?
That may or may not be an important question, but Ms. Gallant has not given you any time to answer it. Or move on to Mr. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. I just want to clarify a couple of things here before we start. Conservative support for Ukraine is not contingent on support for this Liberal government. The people of Ukraine know where we stand, and I spoke to them on Sunday at the Ukraine consulate, and it's very clear. Second is, if you read the Globe Mail this week, you'd see that in their view, and in many people's view, the seizure of Parliament is squarely at the feet of the Liberal government. So let's be clear on that. This is not the Conservative Party holding up Parliament. Third, I'd like to point out for the Minister that GDP is a standard calculation across the world, and including NATO, that represents the entire value of goods and services minus imports produced in a country. That's also the definition that NATO uses. So we'd love to see an update on our on our military spend versus the standard definition of GDP that coincides with that from the Finance Department. Sir, are the cuts to the military being driven by the PMO?
I'm sorry?
The cuts to the military, the $2.7 billion, is that being driven by the PMO?
No.
And
again, I'm going to have to clarify that, because you've made a blanket statement which is completely inaccurate. We've been asked to do, in every department in the government has been asked to do a funding refocusing to make sure.
So
that
why would we not shift that spending versus cut it from the military and shift it to where it's needed?
The decision is being made. As I've already indicated, we were asked to do a funding refocusing, and we did. And it was necessary because, quite frankly, when we're spending money, we have to make sure that it actually contributes to capability for the Canadian Armed Forces and support for the members of the Canadian Armed Forces.
My question is, sir, if we are refocusing the spending, why is it not refocused within the military so that we get support for the troops that need it and increase their capabilities here?
Well, and it's because we've learned the lessons of the past. And I remember too vividly, and I know the Canadian Armed Forces does as well, in 2013, when a previous government cut $2.5 billion from the defense budget, and it was a broad axe slash at the defense, and it reduced defense spending to less than 1%.
Would you say that
we're not going to do that again?
Excuse me, gentlemen. It generally works better when you don't talk over each other. It generally works better when the answer and the question are roughly the same. So, Mr. Stewart, if you let the minister answer, we'll give him another 10, 15 seconds, and then we'll go on to Mr. Stewart's next question.
Comment. I think deeds speak. You know, talk is cheap, But when it comes time to actually step up and do what is necessary for Ukraine, I am very hopeful that every member of our parliament will do what is required and support these supplementaries.
Okay, Mr. Stewart.
Thank you. Would you say that we have the necessary warrior culture within the CAF?
I will tell you that I am daily impressed by the dedication and resolve of the members of the Canadian Armed Forces to do their job. Not 100% sure what you're referencing as a warrior culture, but what I can tell you is the Canadian Armed Forces needs great people. And in my understanding, great people includes great women, great Indigenous candidates, and great diverse candidates. And as my friend and colleague, the Secretary of Defense of the United States just said yesterday,
I think we either have it or we don't.
The Canadian Armed Forces,
the last thing I wanted to ask you about, sir,
stronger.
Mr. Stewart.
the last thing I wanted to ask you about is, given that we have in some places warrior culture, do our warriors have the tools that they need to feel safe in their job and equipped when they're in theater to do that job?
Exactly why I've come before you to ask for the resources that are in the estimates to make sure that we provide members of the Canadian Armed Forces with the tools they need to do their job. And I'm really hopeful we're going to get your support this time.
Have the soldiers right at the ground level been asked if they feel like they're supported by the government?
We speak to the soldiers all the time. I've been traveling across the country.
Has there been a survey done?
What's that?
Has there been a survey done with the data?
Well, we speak to our people all the time about their experience. We've been talking to them about housing. We've been talking about access to childcare, and we've been talking to them about the tools and equipment that they need to do their job. It's one of the reasons we in our
have we been able to supply them with the 9mm ammunition to train?
Well, again, it actually requires not talk, but investment. And it's one of the reasons I hope that this committee will support those investments, because the Canadian Armed Forces has had enough of talk.
I wonder if there's been any talk of expanding the MSP in order to fill some of the gaps that we have in that supply program.
Well, again, there's some outstanding work that's being done in order to make sure that we invest in the things that the Canadian Armed Forces need, but it requires the release of the money. That's why I'm here this morning.
Okay, just back to the 9mm. Has there been a resolution on supply of the 9mm ammunition for training of reservists?
Yeah, actually, there's been some very good work done in contracts with Canadian suppliers to make sure that proceeds quickly. And yes, I think there's been real progress on that.
Thank you.